So to me, Ukraine Gate as opposed to Russia Gate, I mean, to me, it's pretty black and white. I mean, Trump is on a call, basically bribing a foreign leader who was just elected that, you do for me, I'll do for you, and get me some dirt on Biden, who Trump probably thought was going to win the nomination. So, I mean, to me, it's kind of, even though we know corruption exists and this is just baked into the cake, we also can't just be like, oh, it's Trump. I mean, what he did was illegal. And what he did, I mean, we would be screaming from the rooftops if that was Hillary Clinton as president. So it is illegal. There is a there as far as Trump doing it. Of course, the Democrats don't actually care about the rule of law. They just care about focusing on impeachment. Trump's the Antichrist, so they don't have to focus on like half the country's starving, half the country's poor, 500,000 people are sleeping out on the streets, Bernie Sanders movement, etc. So I'm not exactly like, rah, rah, let's go Nancy Pelosi. But at the same time, Trump did do this, and I think it's valid that I think he should have been impeached for several things before this. But I think it is valid that they are looking into impeachment. Where you lose me here is, these unfair. There's nothing to this about Joe Biden and his son. His son just happened to be on a board making $50,000 a month for, I don't even think he ever showed up at the board meetings. Also, his son goes with him to China in 2013, I think it was. And all of a sudden, like a day later, Chinese company gives his son's private equity group like $1 billion contract. As far as I know, Hunter Biden doesn't speak Chinese or have any knowledge at all. So, of course, in fairness, Biden is not the first one to do this. You think Chelsea Clinton's on all these boards because of her expertise? You think, I'm sure Obama, there was generosity to friends and family. But there is corruption with Biden beyond just Ukraine. I mean, NAFTA, TPP, bankruptcy bill. I just did a story. Did you know that his donors are freaking out because he's going down in the polls and Trump is attacking him every day? So his campaign literally did a donor strategy session at Morgan Stanley's offices.
Oh my God.
So they're having basically they're holding a meeting to like soothe the donors.
Well, there was a really good article
at Wall Street banks.
There was a really good article about how Biden was complaining that Trump was stealing his donors. He said, "Trump, stop stealing my donors," which says everything.
Right. Right. So I'll start with the Trump part of it because, I mean, I thought Russiagate was a lot of BS, but I think there's validity to at least that Trump went way over the line, more so than he typically has.
Well, the first thing I'll say is, can I accidentally somehow end up with a $50,000 a month sinecure on a board that I don't have to do anything for?
Because certainly not at status quo.
I know. Like, if it's that easy, please sign me up. I mean, come on. All right, look. The thing about this case is it's 100% true that this is definitely an example of corruption by Trump. I mean, we have this, non-official kind of transcript. It's not actually a transcript, but it's kind of a transcript where he's asking for deliverables. I mean, come on. It's so obviously quid pro quo. It's so obviously corruption. And at the same time, of course, none of us should be surprised. I mean, this is how Trump did business. He was notoriously corrupt, involved allegedly with the mafia. He was involved in gambling. I mean, it's all corruption. I mean, whatever, real estate, it's all corruption. It's all quid pro quos. He's not like some great businessman. He can't even get a deal done here. But so there's no question that it's actual corruption. But at the same time, the ultimate irony, like always, is that the Democrats are putting all their eggs in this basket once again, and it exposes their own corruption. So it's just showing once again how corrupt both of these corporate Wall Street parties are. The Bidens are absolutely 100% complicit in corruption in Ukraine. Let's unpack what Hunter Biden was doing, because the degree of the scandal hasn't been uncovered by media. The corporate media is always...
I don't want to interrupt you, but for once I'll defend a New York Times reporter. Ken Vogel at the New York Times was actually digging into what you're talking about, and he's been just lambasted by the rest of the media for using, to pushing right-wing talking about Joe Biden. Listen, I know, I mean, I'm not best friends with him, but I know Ken, like during the 2016 campaign, he was on the plane and we got to talking. He's one of the decent corporate reporters, in my view. And he was actually digging into that there is more with Biden and corruption in Ukraine. And for that, he was basically like shunned in the corporate media.
Yeah, and Ken Vogel before did really good reporting at Politico. And actually, Ken Vogel did excellent reporting showing how Ukraine meddled in the election. So we always hear, oh, Russia's hacked our democracy. The Kremlin stole the election. Well, that was all completely overblown and ridiculous. And the only evidence they could supposedly find was these Russian Facebook ads, which come on. And RT, the DNI released this report, and they blamed Abby Martin. Half the report was blaming our friend Abby Martin for her show on RT. I mean, come on. But meanwhile, Ken Vogel showed in this Politico investigation that Ukraine was trying to dig up dirt against Paul Manafort and against Trump, who are both extremely corrupt. Obviously, it's not fake dirt; it's real. But Ukraine was meddling to try to prevent Trump from getting elected on behalf of Hillary Clinton. So, my colleague Max Blumenthal at the Gray Zone, he did a great interview discussing this detailed corruption with Aaron Mate, and you can find, they go super into details. I'm not going to go into those details with all the names, but
hold on, thegrayzone.com.
Yeah. .com. But the funny thing is, Max made a joke, and he's right. Max said, "Look, every 4 years in the U.S., we vote the president who's going to meddle in elections around the world. So it's only right that other people around the world try to meddle in our own election." I mean, honestly, if you're thinking about how politics actually works, of course I don't support foreign meddling, but that's the reality of how it works. And Ukraine was also involved in the meddling. Anyway, whatever. The point is, let's get back to the Bidens. All right. Biden is extremely corrupt, and it's kind of good, honestly. Look, I think this impeachment proceeding, I think in a lot of ways it's a bad idea. I think it could backfire and help Trump because it confirms the narrative that there's a witch hunt against Trump. At the same time, I think it could hurt Biden. As a progressive, I think that's actually kind of good. I'm glad it can hurt Biden because he's even worse than Hillary Clinton. This is one of the worst candidates you can imagine.
I think he would lose worse than she did.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. Who knows? But
I mean, in fairness to Hillary Clinton, she could at least string sentences together well.
And she can at least go on air and her eye won't bleed.
Right.
Also, by the way, let's talk about media conspiracies. No one talked about Joe Biden went on TV on a debate with millions of people watching, and his eyes started bleeding live on air, and there was no discussion of it. Right. Meanwhile, Bernie for the first time has a health issue. He has a heart attack, and it's all over. Everyone's saying Bernie needs to drop out. Bernie should drop out.
Right.
It's just like the double standards are so obvious that everyone in the corporate media on Wall Street, Silicon Valley, they are all in for Biden. And if Biden can't make it, if he can't physically survive to the finish line, they're in for Warren. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about that. But let's talk about Ukraine. We're getting distracted here. Okay. So in Ukraine, this scandal is real. In Ukraine, in 2014 in February, there was a coup against the democratically elected president, the democratically elected government of Ukraine. Now, you never hear that discussed. You never hear the historical context in corporate media. If there ever is historical context, it's like last week. It's not, 5 years ago, so long ago. Under Obama, Vice President Joe Biden was playing a leading role in Ukraine policy. He kind of took it under his wing, was overseeing Ukraine policy. Biden oversaw a coup in Ukraine. By the way, in that coup, neo-Nazi and neo-fascist groups, far-right white supremacists, played a role as the kind of muscle behind this coup attempt, and then they later incorporated into the Ukrainian National Guard. It's a huge scandal alone there, and they've been working with white supremacists in the US and Europe. Recently, a few weeks ago, an extremist in the US Army was arrested for planning bomb attacks targeting Beto O'Rourke and a media outlet. And there was reporting on that. There wasn't discussion of the fact that he was also trying to join a Ukrainian neo-Nazi group, the Azov Battalion, which was armed by the US government and which is embedded in the Ukrainian National Guard. So Ukraine is just like a never-ending series of scandals. This is an extremely corrupt country. Ever since the Soviet Union was overthrown. Overnight, the Clinton administration imposed what was called neoliberal shock therapy, privatizing everything. And basically, overnight, the economy in Ukraine and other countries was just privatized and handed over to these series of oligarchs. Mm-hmm. So literally overnight, the day before you had like a national mineral company, everything was owned by the state, right? And then the next day there's an auction, and all of these corrupt oligarchs just like take control. This is my industry now. I'm an oligarch who controls the mining. I control, Poroshenko controlled chocolates and candy. Poroshenko was the previous leader of Ukraine, who was like the coup leader. Anyway, so Biden was overseeing this policy, this coup in this extremely corrupt country. In February 2014, immediately after the coup, a few months later, Hunter Biden, who has no experience in Ukraine, who doesn't speak Ukrainian, who has no foreign policy experience, who had just been, kicked out of the military for drug addiction, he suddenly, in his lap, he gets offered a $50,000 per month, so more than $500,000 per year, symbolic position sitting on the board of not just any Ukrainian company, but one of the most notoriously corrupt gas companies in Ukraine. First of all,
a position that Joe Biden never spoke to him about, ever, according to Joe Biden.
Well, this is the hilarious thing. So Biden says, we never talked about it. Actually, if you go back and look in an article that was published in a major article that was published about Hunter Biden's drug addiction, this long piece, this investigation piece, in this piece from like 2 years ago, Hunter Biden mentions his position in Ukraine, and Joe Biden allegedly told Hunter, according to this article, well, you have to be careful. He gave him advice. So we know, because he's quoted in that article, that he did obviously talk to his son about it. Mm-hmm. So he's lying there. But anyway, but let's think about this for a second. Hunter Biden is given this position months after the coup his dad helped oversee. And let's go further. What is this company, this Ukrainian natural gas company? It is controlled by one of the most corrupt oligarchs in Ukraine. He was so corrupt that the head of this Ukrainian natural gas company had $24 million of his own personal assets frozen in the UK, in Britain, because he was involved in corruption. And he was in the process of appealing the British and the Americans to try to unfreeze his assets so he can continue doing business. So there's so many levels of corruption, and we're just barely scratching the surface. The last thing I'll say on this is that Biden's last speech was in Ukraine. So Biden had been seriously invested in Ukraine. This scandal of him allegedly, who knows, but allegedly pressuring this Ukrainian anti-corruption czar from pushing him out so he couldn't investigate the corruption. Who knows if that's actually true? We can't really believe Giuliani, but I think we should be very skeptical. And all I'll say is that, look, let's talk more about the effect on the Democrats. This very likely is an example of real corruption by Trump. But it also is even more likely, in broad daylight, a blatant example of corruption by Biden, implicating not just Biden, but the Obama administration. And it's very likely that Trump and the right wing are going to be able to use this scandal to help their own re-election campaign, because they're going to be like, look, Russiagate failed, which it did. Russiagate was built on lies, which it was. Now they're trying to do this whole Ukraine-gate thing. They went one country over ironically, they tried to prove that Trump colluded with Russia, and they couldn't prove it. So now they went to Russia's enemy, which is in a war with Russia, Ukraine, and they actually did prove Trump's collusion with Ukraine. And all it is going to, I think, for a lot of people who are maybe sympathetic to Trump and they're kind of conservative leaning but aren't sure who they're going to vote for, I think it actually could potentially help win them over to Trump's side, because Trump has said for 2 years now this is a witch hunt. And he's paranoid and he does lie a lot and he's very corrupt, but he's not wrong that it is kind of a witch hunt.
I think what's really going to happen if Joe Biden was the nominee, Trump's got $200 million in the bank from the RNC and his own fundraising. I think they're just going to carpet bomb Joe Biden, not to mention, I mean, they've already run ads showing him stumbling through his words and things like that. But with more of this Ukraine stuff, and really what's going to happen is it's just going to depress turnout. Just like you had in 2016, it's going to depress turnout for the Democrats. You're going to have less black people coming out, less Latinos coming out, definitely less young people if Joe Biden is the nominee. And Trump's going to win with his small base, but that will prevail if he's facing somebody that is being depicted as corrupt. And he is corrupt. Joe Biden is corrupt. Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.